Hi, this is Esther Lynn, photographer for MMAfighting.com, and I'd like to share some images from my week at UFC 205. Wednesday morning marked the official start of UFC 205 in New York City. We walked onto the floor of Madison Square Garden. I looked up at the iconic building. I sat myself down next to the hoop, as if I was about to photograph a Knicks game. I thought of the boxing matches I photographed here and all the performances, the contests of varying natures this ceiling has seen. It's the morning after the presidential election, and sport has a way of feeling perhaps a bit less important in the big scheme of things. But here we are, the fans seated behind me, ready to see the participants in Saturday's 3 title fights in this historic building for the UFC's first return to New York in over 21 years. The workouts kick off with Eddie Alvarez. The lightweight champ hits mitts with coach Mark Henry. Eddie is eager, impassioned. The strawweight champion Jacek is next, flowing through her agile and crisp striking, albeit this time with a new camp. The welterweight champ Tyron Woodley asked the crowd to have his back. Then, the challenger to the 150-pound title, fellow Polish striker Karolina Kowalkiewicz. The second of the day's challengers, Stephen Thompson, followed, flying through a bevy of his flashiest strikes. And finally, the fans roared. The partisan crowd is here for this man, challenger to the lightweight crown and current featherweight champion, Conor McGregor. McGregor goes through a gamut of techniques. Then, he goes to find a basketball in a bold move that could definitely backfire, returns to the free throw line for a shot. McGregor shoots. Crowd is suddenly quiet. The ball hits the backboard, and after a little teasing, drops through the hoop. Soft sound of the net, and then cheers erupt. I think a little awkwardness comes from the fact that we don't normally watch people play basketball in what is essentially underwear. Sure, it banks in, but he made the shot, and it was certainly brave to try such a thing here on this hollowed court. After the workouts, we headed outside the garden to recap our first day of festivities. I took this with my phone because I had to play security and watch over our pile of bags and equipment while they taped the show. A few more hours of work in the office, and then some of the team headed up to dinner at the original Patsy's Pizzeria in East Harlem, one of the few coal oven joints in the city. We were the last patrons in the restaurant before they closed for the night. And even as we were about to leave, our reporter Mark Ramondi is still sitting there, filing a story. The next day, we're in the theater at MSG for the press conference. This beautiful lattice of lights along the ceiling goes all the way back to the early days of the garden, in which a different iteration of the building in the 1920s had a similar lighting design. The lines of warm-colored bulbs definitely give me a sense of nostalgia and history. And like nearly every press conference that involves McGregor, we begin a little late. And surprise, surprise, McGregor isn't here. And once again, we are conversing with an empty chair. Alvarez and McGregor's fans taunt each other in the Irishman's truancy. Perhaps in his own turn, Eddie tells us he'll come back out when Conor does, and exits the stage. As if cued, McGregor dances onto stage donning white Gucci mink in the lightweight champ's absence, all the way to Alvarez's belt. Conor arranges the 2 belts in front of his seat on the dais, and the crowd goes wild. Just like that, 2 gold belts. Alvarez returns, goes to recover his title from the thief, and here we descend again. I wait for someone to throw something, but Alvarez just folds up his chair and drops it behind McGregor. The crash of metal jolts McGregor from his own seat. while welterweight champ Tyron Woodley prepares to record the proceedings on his phone. After being hoisted back, McGregor returns, hands up, promising not to escalate. There were a lot of things said, but all I heard was something about his big Irish balls. I guess maybe there were other folks on the dais too, but they didn't get too much in the way of questions. I doubt that mattered much to the Polish strawweights, who came face to face, exchanged words, and Jędrzejczyk with a little push into Kowalkiewicz's head, creating a little chaos of her own. The welterweights are cordial, but intense. And Dana White preemptively bars the men in the main event from nearing each other, even as both reassure the UFC president that they are calm. As the men exit the stage, McGregor lifts his fist in the air, opening his fur coat to reveal a tag. I wonder how much such a coat costs. Outside, it's night already, the garden lit up in blue and orange. Our team on the ground here in New York recaps the second day of fight week. Never a dull moment in this sport. The next morning is official weigh-ins at the Fighter Hotel. Tim Kennedy weighed in to get his show money after his bout with Rashad Evans was canceled this week, and then Jacare weighed in at 189 for reasons I still do not know. Midway through the proceedings, McGregor arrives to weigh in. And Mystic Mac lives up to his name as he steps onto the scale and somehow the circuit breaker trips, turning off all the lights facing him. The house lights are still on though, and I make a small exposure adjustment and continue to shoot. In a few hours, we're packed back into the garden, slowly filling up for the ceremonial weigh-ins. And the Irish have arrived as well. When it's time for the main event, everyone in front of me stands, so I dart out into the aisle and run forward. It's a mess. We're all clamoring for a clean, sharp image. Eddie keeps his hands back, White already between them, and a gang of security there to make sure it doesn't get too wild. And just when we thought the festivities were over, Ronda Rousey then marches onto stage to square off with bantamweight champion Amanda Nunes. Rousey's eye makeup resembles war paint. Hair already braided, she looks primed to fight right now. Dana White turns them forward for a pose, holding onto Rousey's arm. Rousey shakes the UFC president loose and struts out, stage left. But wait, this night isn't over. As we leave the building to film our preview show, outside the garden, the Irish are rollicking, boisterous. The cameraman Casey is hoisted up, then Era Hawani disappears, carried off by a sea of green. We finally find each other against a window, surrounded. I am ecstatic for tomorrow. As we round up our things and ready to retreat and edit, I am introduced to this young man, Action. The miniature McGregor donning a white fur coat and red turtleneck and ostentatious red trousers. It is a gorgeous fall Saturday in New York. Though, just 20 or so blocks north of the garden, people had taken to the streets to protest in the wake of Donald Trump winning the American presidency. Thousands of people peacefully walked towards Trump Tower. I had Casey lift me onto his shoulders to look out, and I could not see the end of the congregation. There were people of all ages, races, genders, and religions, supporting an assortment of causes, utilizing clever chants. Protesters greeted police politely. Everyone was friendly and helpful. It was heartwarming. As we walked back towards MSG to prep for the night ahead, we passed Michael Moore talking to a small crowd, and then an adorable couple taking their wedding photos. We kept walking south. In Times Square, UFC 205 advertisements flanked both sides. I was giddy with anticipation for the evening ahead. It's fight night. Chikage and Carmouche are the first to enter the octagon here on this big night for the UFC. The highly anticipated bout between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Michael Johnson quickly turns south into a shellacking of the menace. At one point, when Johnson's arm is pinned behind him by the Dagestani fighter, Nurmagomedov tells Johnson to give up. He doesn't want to hurt him anymore. After his win, Khabib walks over to Dana White, looking to have a rather frank conversation. Pay-per-view begins with Raquel Pennington and Miesha Tate. The fight is a grind. Too tough to give up completely, but unable to change the direction of the bout, Tate's durability now seems a curse. At the end of 3 rounds, Tate embraces Pennington, briefly speaks, and kisses her forehead. Then the 10-year veteran and women's MMA pioneer announces her retirement. Miesha Tate leaves the octagon for perhaps the last time. Polish Power versus Polish Power is on now. In the darkened arena, Joanna Jędrzejczyk walks to the center of the cage to look Kowalkiewicz in the eye. When the lights come up, they meet in the center. The champion has her fist up, ready. It's a battle from the start. Perhaps many didn't know enough about Kowalkiewicz, but she certainly knew Jędrzejczyk, as they exchanged and the challenger seemed to be gaining on Joanna Champion. Kowalkiewicz drops the champ in the 4th. Jędrzejczyk is hurt, but climbing back up slowly, recovers and returns fire. Karolina takes the round. We start the 5th and final round with appreciative applause from the crowd. It was a heated contest, but the champion retains her belt. Kowalkiewicz showed that she was no pushover, and at points, she looked like she might steal that gold. But tonight, Jędrzejczyk gets to fly her flag in victory. It is time for the second title fight of this grand night. The first round ends with Thompson on his back. Woodley opens up a cut on the challenger, and when he walks back to his corner after the horn, there's so much blood on his face, Thompson is scooping it out. Thompson battles back in the second. They toil back and forth, each round close. But in the 4th, Woodley clocks Thompson and sends him to the mat. Wonderboy gets up, it gets dropped again, weathering the onslaught but finally dropping to his knees where Woodley gets his neck. The crowd is losing its mind. Even Madonna is on her feet. The contestants give each other respect as the final round begins. The 5th round is Thompson's, as perhaps Woodley burnt the last of his energy in what the champ would later admit was an ill-advised guillotine. Final round ends and my ears are ringing with the crowd's ovation. Both men stand beside Miragliotta for the results. There's an odd pause. Bruce Buffer leaves the cage, returns and reads the scores, though it's a majority draw, he reads Woodley as the split decision winner. White puts the belt on Woodley, another strange pause. They bring both men back to the center to explain. Buffer rereads the scores again, this time the result is a majority draw, and they raise both their arms. The crowd is confused. There are some boos, mostly confusion. I've never seen a champion so dejected after such an electrifying fight. The garden is buzzing. The challenger, Conor McGregor, walks out first. The arena darkens again as the champ emerges. Alvarez rounds the cage, and McGregor tries to will eye contact and then does the Vinnie Mac strut behind Alvarez as he passes. The lights dim again to ready the announcement. McGregor strides into the center of the cage and spreads his arms, open to the champ, open to the sky. I run to the back of the media section so I can see the whole cage. I look up at the Jumbotron, the words Madison Square Garden lit up at the top. I took out my hearing protection. I want to soak in all of this, even though the shouts and cheers are ear-splitting. Not long into the fight, McGregor drops the champ. I don't have a great view from where I'm seated. Both the ref and the post are in the way, but I hear the crowd roaring, so I know something is happening. There's a lot of scrambling and strikes, but I don't really see any of it. I just see that Alvarez is hurt, and somehow we make it out of the first round. But in the second, McGregor's confidence is cresting. Even showboating a little with his hands behind his back, Notorious caps this massive night with a combination that drops the lightweight champ for the third time, and it's over. Referee John McCarthy's seen enough, and I look at Alvarez's face. It's flush with pain and loss. McGregor takes a victory lap, sauntering about the cage, miming a phone call, checking his imaginary watch, ending in that billionaire strut. Conor McGregor is now both the featherweight and lightweight champion of the UFC. McGregor gets the tricolor and goes for another lap, rounds to thank his head coach John Kavanagh. It's a frenzy in there as the cameramen and UFC officials spill into the cage. After the results are read, McGregor gets on the mic to apologize for absolutely nothing. The fans' songs are thundering, MSG is pulsating. McGregor now wears the lightweight belt, demands his second belt. Another belt is finally produced, and McGregor holds them up, thinks better of it, and the Irishman scales the octagon and dons his prizes there. McGregor is coordinating this image for us, essentially telling us, this is your next cover shot, friends. He's made UFC history, the first to simultaneously hold two belts in two weight classes. Coaches Kavanagh and Roddy take a moment to themselves to celebrate. McGregor finally leaves the cage with belts firmly on each shoulder, surveying the garden, looking through that iconic ceiling into the stars above. I grab my flash and catch McGregor as he passes. This reminds me of old boxing photos. That bright light beaming right into the gold belts, the certainty in his eyes. Though I photographed so many of McGregor's fights, he's always seemed like some kind of image of lore to me, living out the classic saga of a prize fighter. I see Conor's father leaving and call out to him. Look at that pride and joy. An hour later, Kowalkiewicz begins the post-fight press conference. Jędrzejczyk is sent to the hospital as a precautionary measure. I think it's 2:30 a.m. Maybe 2:45? At this hour, everything is muted and blurred. The colors and edges are blending together. We wait for the post-fight press conferences to continue. The welterweight champ is next. Woodley praises Thompson, notices when Wonder Boy enters the back of the room. I find him there, snacking on potato chips. I ask Tyron Woodley for a photo as he exits stage right. The champ asks me if I want him to remove his sunglasses. I am grateful to be given this level of directness, to be given the time to let me set my light, this patience and sincerity. I do not take this for granted. This honesty is such a vulnerable but fairly often afforded view in prize fighting. We are spoiled by the riches of such candor. Stephen Thompson is next to answer questions, alongside Chris Weidman, who looks upon Thompson with the fondness of familial bond. Finally, the champ, as he puts it, is here. He carefully arranges the belts at the front of the table before removing his coat. McGregor reveals that he's to be a father. We've suspected it all week, but his anxiety and happiness is glowing here. Now that he has a young'un on the way, McGregor looks to his future, reminds us that the new owners haven't called him, and that he is responsible for much of the UFC's massive recent success and, in part, contributed to its colossal price tag. McGregor has his two belts. Now he just needs his piece of the promotion's pie. It's 3:30 a.m., and McGregor stands and places his gilded titles back on his shoulders. he exits into a cloud of friends and family. We record our post-fight show. MSG staff tells us we have to leave by 4:30 a.m. It's 4. We pack up our gear and shuffle out of the building. I think again about the world. America on the precipice. And realize that this is the beauty of sport. No, it's the beauty of the narratives and prize fighting. That grand adventure that wraps us into each blow, each spray of flying sweat and blood, and each tear of utter achievement and joy. McGregor makes UFC history on an enormous night for the sport in Madison Square Garden. I edited, filed, and worked alongside my colleagues until 8 a.m. Maybe 9. And for that grand evening, those dark morning after hours of reverie and effort, and even into the next week, I found myself lost in the memory of this night. I could look back each time and remember the bouts fondly, its epic scale giving it that instant tinge of legend and nostalgia. Perhaps this will all dissolve in a cloud of smoke next week, if that army comes to take McGregor's second belt. Or I'll be traveling the country and overhear strangers recounting the same reverence and wonder I feel when I picture UFC 205 in my mind. This is Esther Lynn for MMAfighting.com, and thank you for watching.